everybody for being here. We are beginning the Economic Development and Community Engagement Committee meeting. We have, if you didn't receive copies of the agenda, are here for your review. We've got a number of items that have been carried over, so we are just going to work through them. Tonight should be a good amount of discussion, hopefully generating some recommendations we can take to the regular meeting on Tuesday. So our first agenda item, Off-Pike Market and City of Norwood MOU elements. I'd like to invite representatives of Off-Pike to come up. As they do, I just want to paraphrase. This topic was directed to our committee so that we could have time as a body to discuss more fully the idea of public-private partnerships. Specifically, in a regular meeting, we were asked to give some thoughts on leasing public property to a private organization. So tonight we have in front of us some elements of what could be included in an MOU, and really just want to discuss these. And so I'd like to go through them, each one, because I'm not sure we've all seen this in terms of this opportunity, and want to give Off-Pike a chance to talk about what's important to them as they consider establishing themselves even more here in the city. So Jason Provins is with us. If you want to give any more context.
Just real quick, if you could explain for people what an MOU is.
Yes, we will get into that more fully. I will say MOU stands for Memorandum of Understanding. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Do you have any more context you want to offer?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. I think really we're kind of in a relationship building stage. So I think on both parties, it's just good for us to brainstorm and kind of throw out ideas and then come up with a solution at the end. So a very liquid, hopefully, meeting tonight.
Okay, so with that in mind, the MOU, Memorandum of Understanding elements that we're looking at are provided through consultation with HCDC, as well as just thinking about what our best practices. And so the first one that is outlined is just describing the parties to the agreement. And so just to be clear, there was a grant opportunity through the county that a private organization, Off-Pike, was interested in pursuing. So they would have been one party, the city being the other party. That's pretty basic. I mean, partnerships could be more complex, but at the time this came up, it was just those two. Another element would be describing the shared vision, mission, purpose, and goals of the MOU. And so, Jason, I believe you had a little more conversation around these elements with your team. Were there any specifics around that second item that you wanted council members to be aware of in terms of what that part meant to you all?
Yeah, so kind of where we're at is Off-Pike Market. We're definitely growing as a market, and what's really hard with a farmer's market is setting up. So we get there probably 3 or 4 hours before the market opens to get all of our equipment, to get everything set up. And what makes a market thrive is kind of some consistency. So people know, or they have a site that they come to on a regular time, regular basis. So I think with this partnership, really we're looking for maybe 2 different types of levels. One is some potential storage at the market house or at another location that's close to there. So that would be a very low entry goal for us to hit. That helps us from dragging equipment across Norwood and that sort of thing. The bigger level would be actually looking at the market house and seeing potential in it, of doing a lease agreement or something like that, to where at least our kind of vision for it would be Off-Pike Market would work to build the funds for rehab and getting it basically operable to run a market. The city would still own the building and everything, but then Off-Pike Market would lease in some sort of form from the city. A lot like what Findlay Market is to the city of Cincinnati.
Any questions or any other thoughts, council members, on describing the shared vision, mission, purpose, goals of the MOU? Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you. So the MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, is that going to be in place of some kind of ordinance or lease agreement, or is this going to be like just an initial draft of it? I guess if you could explain that part.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that question. So from my point of view, this is a tool to help the city frame out how it would partner with another organization. So this is not a contract. This is not an MOU of this type. Wouldn't even necessarily be a binding agreement. It would be a description of what could be included in a larger agreement. I know we have some folks in the room who have worked on MOUs before, and so in a moment I will open up for more comment from the public that's here, because part of the ask was that the public would be able to respond to the opportunity. So an MOU, I think at this point in time, what we're doing is just trying to outline what is important for the city to take a point of view on as it pursues partnership. So this would not be the contract, but there might be things that we have a point of view on where we might say as council, or the city might say as the administration, you know, if we're ever going to enter agreements, everything we sign has to be in blue ink, as an example of setting out kind of parameters for how the agreement would operate.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
It does, yes.
I think there's a lot of opportunity for us here in terms of figuring out what's important to us as a city in leveraging opportunity. So all questions are good questions and all comments are welcome. Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, so you provided a real big range of what could possibly happen under that too. So I would assume that as we work through the process, seems like, as I've read through this is a kind of what happens at the top of the page affects what's below the page. So understanding we're just going through this for education at this point, but I could see where, you know, if you were at the low end of agreement on this, this would substantially change potentially what we would agree to in the rest of the parts. So it's cool to have. I like the idea of having the range and then seeing how that plays out across the rest of it.
Yeah. And so what this type of document does for Off Pike Market and potentially the city of Norwood is it allows us to start really like fundraising. One of the things that held us up on our grant is there wasn't really an understanding of what the city wanted to do with that property. So as we kind of define this document and make it a little bit more solid, what it does is it communicates is the city understands Off Pike Market is this and plans to do this, while Off Pike Market understands the city wants to do this and with the building. So it kind of puts both parties on the same page, as to say, so that as we're moving forward with plans for whatever that building may become, the city has clearly said, yep, we're interested in doing a market and letting Off Pike Market go forward. And then Off Pike Market has said to the city, yep, we're interested in making a market building and we'd like to move forward.
Thank you, Jason. Anything else on that part of the? Okay, so the third is define the initial term of the eventual agreement, including commencement date. So one of the things I think I'm recalling correctly is the particular grant opportunity that Off Pike was pursuing had a prerequisite. I don't remember if it was a requirement, so I don't want to misspeak, but there was a desire to see a lease in place. And that had a certain time frame attached to it in terms of what the funder preferred. Is that right?
Yeah, so as we talked to the grant organization, basically what they wanted to see initially up front was some sort of agreement between us and the city, saying the city would like to see this building be rehabbed or at least come to terms with what Off Pike Market's mission is. And then at the end of that, basically after construction, when occupancy would occur. So the kind of the steps I think that at least are happening in my mind is we would develop this MOU. So that's where the city can say, yep, we'd like to develop this building. Off Pike Market said, hey, we'll like to do the heavy lifting, do the fundraising, help with the construction, that sort of thing. And then after the MOU is up and the construction is hopefully done, we then turn into a lease agreement. So the partnership changes a little bit from an MOU to an actual lease.
Any questions or comments on that? Mr. Ponsel?
Yes, thank you. So does having the MOU in place, does that actually fulfill like some of the requirements when it comes to being able to, you know, show the commitment like that you have, you're being able to get the grants that you all are applying for? We had the Off Pike Market come to the council meeting. Does the MOU kind of satisfy that need to show that the city's committed, that everybody's on board, or do you actually have to have the lease in place before you go for some of those grants?
That's a great question, and of course it's going to depend upon the grant. The one that we were pursuing originally, after talking to the program managers, they indicated that an MOU would stand, because what that basically says is both parties are kind of on the same page, so they're both agreeing to the same thing. Where I can kind of see from their perspective, without an MOU or without some letter of agreement, one party could be saying, yeah, the city wants to do this, and the city is kind of unaware of it, so then the funds are issued and then things go south very quickly, I'm sure.
To follow up?
Nope. That's good. Thank you.
And
Okay.
I will say, we are a group of citizens that are definitely new at this, and we're kind of figuring it out as we go. We've had some phenomenal mentoring and coaching with HCDC and some other folks. So my recommendation is always, let's get some smart brains on this and figure out if there's anybody that has some experience, let's pull them in. But I think our first step is really to determine if the city is interested in pursuing, which obviously we're having this conversation, but at what level does that look like? And that's kind of what I started out with. So does that look like giving us some space so that we can continue to do our market? I will say we also file annually a permit request to close down that street. What would help us out a little bit with marketing is a consistency. So the city saying, yep, we'd like Off-Pike Market to be a regular staple for our city. We're just going to go ahead and grant you that space. Just let us know what days you're going to need to run the market, so that we're not waiting until January 1 and holding off on marketing and getting merchants and all that sort of stuff. And then also just some storage. We have trash cans, we have tents and that sort of stuff that we lug across the city from residents' houses that it's kind of cumbersome in the morning. So that may be the first step for us. And then obviously the final step would be an actual lease, a rehab or a construction of that building and making it an operable market for the city.
So I think a follow-up question for me, I think I'm hearing potentially Off-Pike would be interested in partnering at whatever level the city wants to confirm it's willing to partner, whether that's attached to grant funding or not.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I think when I reflect back on our last regular meeting when we discussed this, it was presented in the context of a grant opportunity. So I think it's important for this body to hear as well as the city to hear Off-Pike wants to partner with the city, period, and is looking to kind of scope out what partnership means.
Exactly, and we've stood on the ground of we just want to be a blessing to Norwood. So if that means throwing a market once a month at a local business or on the street or whatever that may be, our funds also go directly back into the city, so it's all volunteer led. So everything that we make, we're either doing marketing or we're fixing up a park or something like that. So really it's on your guys' shoulders, sorry to give you the heavy burden, to figure out what the city would like to do with Off-Pike Market. And we're here to bless, so whatever you guys decide, we're definitely on board with.
Thanks for making that clear. You mentioned just now that if you could hear from the city up front, hey, just let us know what dates the market wants to operate, that would ease permitting. The next item on the list has to do with renewal terms and the process of invoking renewal terms. Other than having maybe a more efficient process for identifying the dates and receiving permits, are there other ways that having a definitive response from the city could help with the execution?
I don't know. That's a great question, though. Something that maybe we can talk about at another meeting.
Okay. So I'm going to read through a couple more of these. Some of them may be more on the, I would say, early side of partnerships. Some others may be more extensive. The fifth is describe the lease premises, property, and expansion rights, if any. The sixth is define the approved uses of and activities on the premise property. And the seventh is define tenants' right to sublet to vendors and any limits or exclusions thereto. So can you, well, I'll start. I think I'm remembering part of the hope would be, should the property be activated, that there could be programming in there year-round. Has there been, and I don't remember if this was in that proposal you all shared early on or not, has there been any thinking about that around what kinds of activities other than the market as it exists today?
Yeah, and this may circle back to your earlier question. So the market sits in a phenomenal location because of Victory Park and the memorial. And so really we kind of see it as one space, and we know that people like to shop and also have things to do. We've done a lot of market research. One of my favorite markets to go to is the Hamilton Flea. They have it at a great Markham Park, and there's tons of stuff to do, and then there's also great shopping as well. So our hope is to utilize that space for programming to where residents can get connected. We would love to see an economic development community engagement booth at our next market. Some of the other programming things are inviting nonprofits in. So we've had the Y there. We actually had a pug event as well. So yes, and to answer your question in short, we definitely want to activate that space because we really see it as the epicenter of economic development in our community.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about would the current engagement of vendors stay up under the umbrella of Off-Pike? Do you foresee there being any need for the vendors to have any sublet agreements?
Sublet agreements with the city.
Sorry, yes, with the city, sorry.
So our hope is to eventually incubate them so that they leave our market. So I don't foresee any like subleasing or anything like that with the city. The way we would set up, if everything went to plan, the partnership worked, we were looking at a building, we would have our merchants hold insurance to also include the city of Norwood. And really the leasing and renting would all be managed by Off-Pike Market.
Okay. Committee? Okay, you guys can.
Yeah. Just and to clarify, the hope would be in the end is that the space is a full-time market, basically, right? So not a you're not looking to have Off-Pike Market in the space once a month. You're looking for the space to be a market full-time and to be able to incubate those businesses within that space.
Correct. Yeah. So some of the things that we've talked about is having a full-time, like 9 to 6 market where people can come for lunch, they can do their shopping. We probably would have Mondays off, so at least one day a week where we can rest and recoup. But then after hours, we'd also like to use it as a community event space. So we're really thinking about if this partnership works out and we're able to rehab the market, how we can get the most bang for our buck as a city. And if it's a place where we could have weddings and that sort of stuff, we would like to do that as well. So we don't want to just, wrap it up for a month and say, oh, it's Off-Pike Markets, no one else can touch it during the rest of the time. We're really trying to make it a space that's fully utilized even when the market's not being held there. So that would be like in the evenings and on that one day off.
Thanks.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think like the question of subleasing, I mean, to me, it would indicate that if the city wouldn't be involved in any subleasing in the sense, like, by that question. I get, to me, this thing seems like it could mean that what is the rights of Off-Pike Market if they were to eventually get a lease to say, you know what, like, we're going to change our vision. We're now going to sublease it and say, you know what, this other group, they're now going to run the building and run a market or whatever. And to me, I think that anything in here, we want to make sure that the city has any approvals. If there ever is something like that comes up, I cannot imagine something like that happening, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of things that I can't imagine happening that do end up happening. So I would just want to make sure that the city's protected on that standpoint.
So let me make sure I'm clear. If I want to have a birthday party at the Market House and it's already under an MOU or a lease with Off-Pike, I think you're saying my birthday party should go through Off-Pike?
Yeah, so that would just be that would be an approved, to me, thinking of it, that would be an approved use of the property, and Off-Pike Market would manage they would be the one managing the property at that point.
Got it.
So they would get to do that. What I'm saying is, if there's a full sublease of the property where
Okay.
they are saying, you know what, look, we're just going to let somebody else run it, at that point, I would just want something in there to say that, look, the city needs to have some conversation on that.
So I think that's a great example of where, back to Jason's point, there's an opportunity for us as a committee to make some statements in terms of what could be the point of view of the city. And so I think that's a clear one. I'm in agreement with what you're saying. I'm glad for the clarity and just the example so others can be thinking about that too. Like, this would be an agreement with one organization, and any programming or activities would be coordinated or run or approved through that existing lease.
That would be, yes, I don't think the city needs to have any kind of major approvals for every little activity that happens.
Yeah.
Really only if there's just a full-on transfer of rights to use the property.
Great. Any other thoughts on those three? Okay, I'll keep going. So number 8, defining the extent of the tenant's authority over activities on the leased properties, on the leased premises, property, and any limits or exclusions to that authority. Defining number 9, the rent during the initial lease term and any subsequent terms. And number 10, describing the responsibilities of each party for paying utilities expenses. So again, these are other elements that could be in the MOU, and would love to hear any thoughts or questions around those.
Oh, I have it.
I've got a few comments.
Go ahead.
Sure, thank you. So the feedback I'm getting is what comes to mind, several questions. This is a historical building here in Norwood. It's a fantastic, so you've mentioned construction and deconstruction. So some of those things concern me when we're talking about a historical building here in Norwood. So definitely something that needs discussed a lot further than that. Also, what the building has been used for in the past, as far as it was a vehicle safety lane. I've heard a target range. I've heard also the contamination in the area. That's a concern. So I've heard that. I know that in that grant there was some. We talked about the grant that you guys were trying to acquire, and there was some things about contaminated areas. So we find out what exactly is in the ground there, I guess. So those are some other things that come to mind. Just the fact that it's a historical building for Norwood is something that really needs to come and play here. And when the construction and the deconstruction come into play, that needs to be talked about a little. Those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. I think that there's definitely room to spell out expectations around what that could look like or what that would need to include in terms of any permissions granted. I think did Off-Pike have any discussion already or any request of the city in terms of how those items are considered in terms of rent and or utilities?
Yeah, so, I kind of talked about the stages of what this relationship might look like. And so my thought is Off-Pike Market wouldn't take that over. We wouldn't have a more robust discussion until we get to the lease point. So I think what we're looking at right now is just establishing kind of an interest MOU. And Mr. Braden, you're absolutely right. One of the things that we want to make sure is that it's a viable building so that we can actually have people in there and we can sell the products we'd like to sell. And then the other piece is the historical aspect of it. So kind of designing the building, making sure that the community and council and everybody agrees to that sort of design. And I mean, we may not get everybody, but at least the majority of the residents that live here say, yep, that's what we'd like the building to look like, and then actually getting to the construction piece. So until we get there, I don't know, it might be getting ahead of ourselves. However, I know it's something that Off Pike Market would like to take on. We fully believe that if you're going to do business, you have to have some skin in the game. So as much as we'd like to offer free spaces to our merchants, that model just doesn't work. So our hope is to actually build in all of that cost. So as we incubate these businesses, they can kind of get a feel of what utilities is like, what paying rent is on a regular basis, and kind of understand how that impacts their business decisions. So that's at least our initial thoughts on it, is that upon lease we'd be able to take over the utilities and kind of the upkeep of the building.
Thank you, Jason. I realize this is probably more broad in some respects than the initial steps. Part of why I think it's important to go through all these is there were a number of questions that were raised in terms of how much, well, at least to me, it felt like how much information is needed right now versus might be needed in time. And so I appreciate you sharing where you all are at and how you're thinking about this. And I'm taking note that having an MOU that describes the shared interest on behalf of the market and the city is a good first step. Any other members of council comments, Mr. Thompson?
I'm thinking it's possible that even multiple MOUs for multiple contingencies could be a path.
Okay.
I would think that the low end is pretty easy to do and would not require much back and forth between the city and Off Pike Market, whereas the high end, of course, takes a lot more work. So
Right.
It could be that we've got a couple of different pathways that we could pursue.
Kind of like a tiered approach for deeper levels of partnership? Is that what you mean by multiple?
Right,
Okay.
in exactly the same way that we talked about, storage space plus an agreement that is, we don't have to submit a request to close off the street every time we have a market.
I
That
see.
to me is a low end, whereas a high end is developing the next 5 years of a lease agreement. So to me, those are two very different
Right,
paths.
right.
And maybe need two very different approaches.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm capturing that, multiple MOUs.
And to kind of play off that, one of the stories that I heard about the building when it was built is that a group of residents were tired of going down to Cincinnati to buy their groceries, so they pooled their funds and built the building and ran a market out of there for the first 8 years. So as we think about this, we know that Off Pike Market is going to be successful when we have a good group of residents that are backing us, that are showing up to the market, that are thinking about the economic impact of buying local. And that may require us to build more time into our relationship with Norwood. Going from 0 to 100 is difficult sometimes. So if we do start with that low end, that might give us a little bit more time to get to know one another, build some trust, get some residents' voices involved and engaged. And then when we go to a higher end, if things work out, we have a lot of engagement, which will ultimately make Off Pike Market successful.
That's good. Thank you for being deliberate to talk about the growth trajectory that can be imagined. The last several items that could be elements of an MOU are definitely on that longer end of the trajectory. And so I just want to read through these and acknowledge they are things that can be talked about at a deeper level, not being overlooked, but maybe just premature at the moment. So number 11, describing the tenant's responsibilities and the landlord's responsibilities for performing and paying for repairs and maintenance, including security, trash, and snow removal. Number 12, defining the parties' respective responsibility for paying property taxes, if any. Number 13, define the parties' rights and responsibilities to make improvements to the premises property. Number 14, define tenants' right to erect identity and wayfinding signage. Number 15, define the insurance and indemnity responsibilities of the parties. And number 16, the final one, defining any reporting requirements of the tenant. So I wanted to be intentional to share out all of those so that we can all be thinking about what the opportunity could hold. Definitely these would be things that as a body we'd want to be thinking about and have a point of view on. Definitely things I hear off Pike saying if the city could decide how it wants to partner, having some understanding of these opportunities would be helpful as well. Are there any initial thoughts or comments on that last set of elements?
So I have one thought, at least on 16.
Yeah.
And one thing that would be interesting maybe for us to do as we kind of build this is for you all to kind of say, hey, what you would like to look at as a body for economic development. And that may come into the play of reporting requirements from off-Pike Market. So if we do the very low entry, what might be helpful for you all for us to provide as far as data or information about off-Pike Market so that as our relationship grows, it gets better and also gives you guys really good decision points on, I don't know, the economic landscape of Norwood.
Thank you for calling that out. A couple of things that have been important to me have been to hear about the growth of the number of vendors. I think that is one way that the diversity of business that I know is important to residents has felt like there's a response to through the vehicle of off-Pike. I think also sales at the market. I know, of course, that's important to the vendors, but being able as a city to better understand utilization from that perspective, as well as the number of attendees. I think that would be meaningful. And especially as activities are added, whether that's a complement to the market or if there's a special event that's sponsored by off-Pike, having a better understanding of what types of activities have the highest appeal would also be very meaningful from my point of view in thinking about what kind of data. And of course, stories. I think the stories of the market, I know I've heard and been part of some pretty neat stories that took shape because there was a market gathering space, and those have been pretty phenomenal. So I think being able to capture those and share those back out, because one of the things that I believe is true of Findlay and other markets is the actual establishment, the nature of having that business there creates connection. It helps to root people where they live. But it also, I think, strengthens people's stake in where they go. I know all my experiences at Findlay have been good. They're all attached to some story or some event. Some of them are kind of funny. You can ask me later if you want a good giggle. So those are some of the things that come to mind for me, at least in this moment.
Can I share a story?
By all means.
Some of you know already, but my grandmother, God rest her soul, passed away at 96. She lived on Sheridan Avenue here. Mayor Shea appointed her to run the safety lanes, and she ran the safety lane for years and years, and so I'm very proud of that and miss her a lot. So that, you know, the building is a great building, and it's got some really neat structure on the inside and out, so it's concerns, you know, the historical aspect, and so it's a great building, and Norwoodians, we love that building. So yeah, that's my story. So.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Any other ideas on data or anything that would be helpful in terms of reporting from council members? No? No? Okay. Any other thoughts, questions, comments, Jason, you want to share or ask of us?
No, I just want to say thank you for allowing us to come and have this conversation. That speaks a lot about at least the start of our relationship and what it may look like down the road. We're really excited for our next market season. So we'll be sending out marketing material very soon. So that's all I have.
Well, thank you for joining us. Look forward to the marketing of what's coming next. Wait, one moment.
Yeah, I was just curious, so what is your intentions for kind of how we move forward, next steps, what have you with this?
That is a great question. I'm going to get to that in just a moment. I realized I forgot something, which was to ask, because this was intentional. Part of why we wanted to have a fuller discussion today was to really get community feedback. So is there anyone here who wanted to add another comment to the discussion around the MOU elements? You can share from there coming up.
Yeah, just very briefly, I've seen like really long form commercial leases that deal with all of these issues. We're not there. I've seen letters of intent. I'm not sure what the memorandum of understanding is and what level of detail is what you really need to be helpful in in applying for grants and bringing in partners. So if you've got, if ACDC has, or if somebody's got, like, here's the kind of level of detail we're talking about, because at this point we're not talking about who's responsible for fixing potholes in the parking lot. You know what I mean? So that's kind of, I'm just curious, so some kind of rough outline of what that looks like would be really helpful, I think, as far as which boxes we have to go in.
Thank you. So the comment was really naming that it would be most helpful to know what amount of information, what level of detail would help the organization explore partnership. And so I think that's a great dovetail back to Mr. Bonsall, your question. But first, was there anyone else? Sure.
Well, I am in support of it, and I just want to say that I feel like it would be an awesome economic development process for the city. I think it would not only improve the standing of what's there at that park, but also it would attract people from other places around the city to come to Norwood and spend money. And I feel like, I know it's a risk for the city, and I do feel like it's a risk, but I feel like it's a risk that's worth taking. And I think most of the people here would really love to see it get back into a market, to be a market again, because that's exciting for people. So I just want to say I support it.
Thank you. So just a quick summary. So we have one resident here who was speaking in support of the economic development process for the city, that we could be improving the current existence of the park, attracting stakeholders outside of the city to come spend money here. There was an acknowledgement that it is a risk, but it's a risk worth taking, and that a lot of people would enjoy it being a market again. So thank you for your comments. Did I miss anyone else?
I have an idea.
Yes, ideas are welcome.
Okay, so I just thought of it. Being that it was first initially a market house, I can put this on the National Registry for historic places. And
I'm sorry,
have
did you
park-
say you did or you could?
can,
Okay.
if approved by Ohio, so anyways, it's those big plaques, it's what the middle school has. So I can get that, and wouldn't it be cool to have that presented on the very first day of being an official market house? And then that would put the market house, I mean, it's gonna be a national registry, so it would be out there.
I'm a little overwhelmed by what was just said. I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, could you come up and say this? There's some exciting news. That's an idea. Susan Daniels,
Where am I going?
come up to the microphone, please.
My camera ready.
It's okay. We're all in this together at all our stages of readiness. Could you tell folks your name and why? And you can have a seat. Would you tell folks your name and your point, what your idea again?
Susan Daniels. I am Vice President of the Norwood Historical Society. Just had the idea as we're talking about this, like, oh yeah, this should be a national, it should be on the National Registry for Historic Places, which is a long process, can take about 6 to 10 months, but if everything's ready, we can have it at the same time as the opening. It's those big historic markers, which is what the middle school has. That was a big celebration when that happened, and the revealing of the big plaque. So it would go outside. But again, it would be a great opportunity to coincide with that.
Did you say this was the first market?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for the market house. It was a market house originally.
Yes. So I guess maybe this is where I didn't, maybe I thought I heard you say, did you say this was the first, obviously it was a market house, we've
Right.
said that. So you're saying it could be registered with the National Registry?
The building itself.
building,
Yeah,
okay.
not the fact that it was, we would put it's basically, the buildings would be on the National Registry, historic places, and you would have like a little summary of what the building used to be, which was originally a market house,
Got it.
and things of that nature.
Excellent. Thank you for that idea. Thank you for coming up and sharing it as well. I think it's really helpful, thank you, for us all to be able to hear how these opportunities intersect. So thank you, everybody who chimed in. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, council members, for your thoughts. So in terms of next steps, because we have a lot of growth opportunity around this, I would like to summarize and send back out to the committee for review recommendations that can then be used with council to start to chunk up like what could be on the, I will say the shallow end, just a letter of intent based on some of the points we called out today, some of the elements that might be needed to create a sense of buy-in, and then continue to work on what would the next phase look like, or what would the next set of definitions need to be supportive of any type of fundraising or further exploration of use of the property. So I'm willing to draft that. If you took notes and you explicitly want something included, please just get that to me. But that's what I intend as the next step. This was a pretty comprehensive list, and I felt it was important to get it all out there at the beginning so people know it's not that we're not thinking about things, it's just that at certain intervals, things don't make sense. It's kind of like baby food. Like you kind of need that for a little while, and then you go to stage 2, stage 3, all that stuff before you get to Capitol Grill. So kind of on that note, I think a phase 1 set of definitions would be helpful for the city to be able to keep talking with Off-Pike, and I think we as a council can put some recommendations together. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to our second agenda item. We have some representatives here from HCDC who are going to provide some program updates. Thank you. Okay, so we have Catherine Fitzgerald, not a stranger, welcome back. We've got Bob Pickford joining us, welcome back. And we also have Mary C. Miller, welcome back. I believe you are providing us with the Norwood Small Business Assistance Program updates for the program that took place.
Correct. So, good evening. That is actually our final report for the Small Business Assistance Program that we conducted here in the city of Norwood. I just want to highlight a few things, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bob. With Mary C. Miller here, we asked, she was a recipient of the services, so just asked her to provide a little bit of testimonial. And we just asked her this evening, and she agreed to, so we appreciate that very much. So we met with 20 existing businesses, as well as prospective businesses and nonprofits. Obviously, Norwood in recent years has enjoyed quite a bit of development on the lateral office development, Carpenter Flats, the affordable housing, and the attraction of CDK Global. With the businesses that we met with, the central location was a key advantage or benefit of being located in Norwood. The community-oriented character of the community, businesses felt very much a part of the Quality of Life Initiative and the Norwood Together Initiative, which is great. And it was also mentioned the proximity to Xavier University. Some of the obstacles, not always getting super responsiveness in terms of the city, particularly for businesses that wanted to expand, and then deteriorating infrastructure, which obviously you all are aware of. Just real quick, the other thing that we did do, because the quality of life study was going on, this is something we don't really normally do, but we did augment some information and study that was being done in Norwood in terms of we call existing conditions. So particularly on Montgomery Road from the lateral to the south border. Just in terms of, I think 137 parcels and buildings altogether, we documented and put into Loveland Technologies' online GIS system. That was already used by others in the city of Cincinnati, on Montgomery Road, so to provide some consistency. That's all been, again, input onto a mapping platform. We also just provided broad, with resources we have at HCDC, broad information maps, list of available properties, and other information that is contained in the report. I want to turn it over to Bob Pickford. Really, the crux of the work here was small business coaching, and Bob did quite a lot of that. So I just want to turn it over to him to discuss some of the work that he did.
Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine, and good evening. So we enjoyed a high level of engagement, I think, in Norwood over the last year with the business coaching services. I met with 16 small businesses and organizations, and that's more than I normally engage with in a community. So I feel like we got a very positive response in Norwood. 7 of those 16 were either startups or very young enterprises. So that's also kind of a unique element of our time in Norwood. And I think it speaks to the fact that there's a lot of positive energy in Norwood right now. The people that I worked with are very enthusiastic about Norwood and about being in Norwood. I can't say that's the case in every community that we work in. So I think you have a strong foundation for building small business in this community. There are 2 of my coaching clients featured in the final report. One is Norwood Together, the newly formed community development corporation that grew out of the quality of life effort, and Mary C. is going to talk to you about that. The other is Off Pike Market, which you've just heard from. And most of you, or some of you anyway, know that before I came to work for HCDC, I was for 11 years the chief executive of the nonprofit that operates Findlay Market. And I was part of one of the negotiators with the city on a management agreement and a property lease between the city's nonprofit management partner and the city. Off Pike Market has, I think, a really big vision, and Norwood has a really big asset. Your historic market house provides a fabulous foundation for the efforts that are underway to create a public market in Norwood. I am very enthusiastic about markets as an economic development driver. All over the world, markets activate public spaces. They provide a low-cost, low-barrier incubation space for new businesses. And they are the centers of all kinds of commerce, not just economic commerce, but social commerce and cultural commerce. So many cities built market houses in the early 20th century, and very few of those still exist. So Norwood is really fortunate to have a building that was created in the early days of the public health movement, when cities were trying to move meat and fish and produce off the streets and under a roof. I hope to remain engaged with Off Pike Market, not as an HCDC employee, but as a volunteer going forward. I think I can offer some assistance with creating that memorandum of understanding, which I think is a better way to begin to define the relationship between the nonprofit and the city than having 2 lawyers sit down and haggle out the terms of a lease. Public markets are operated for a public purpose, and the city of Norwood will want to define what that public purpose is in its agreements with Off Pike Market. So I look forward to continuing to work with you on that. I think the CDC that Mary's going to talk to you about is an equally important step forward in the economic development realm in Norwood, and I'll turn the microphone over to Mary C. now.
Thank you, Bob. I guess this is on. Is it on?
Yes.
Well, you guys all know the history of Norwood Together, that we started as a resident-led organization and develop the quality of life plan for Norwood based on several one-on-one interviews. And in that process, felt like we were being led to become a community development corporation. We were very inexperienced in this area. So because of Catherine's connection with LISC, who worked with us, we were invited to participate in some of the initial planning stages for this program, and also were involved in asking them for some of the information that she was talking about on Montgomery Road, just to be thinking about what would that look like for us as a community development corporation. On top of that, I must say that both Catherine and Bob have been available to us. We have met with them at least monthly, one of them, if not both of them, and they've walked us through the process of what we needed to do to become a 501c3. We have, as you know, reserved our name and received our incorporation papers, and now we're working on our tax exempt status. But I don't know that we could have done that without the assistance of someone in the know. They've also connected us with funders. They've connected us with people that have had experience in this area. We've conducted multiple interviews with people. We've been mentored, and we've received help from all kinds of people, not only from HCDC, but from CBI at Xavier, and obviously still from LISC. But all of these organizations, the amazing thing to me is they all really support Norwood, and they really want to pour their energy into Norwood and help us to make Norwood the place that we all know it can be. And so I am extremely thankful for the time and energy that they've spent with us. I mean, Bob and Catherine have answered every question. They've answered every email. They've invited me to, Catherine's invited me to the Hamilton County Comprehensive Economic Development meetings, which have been amazingly informative. And not only that, but we've been able to contribute, which has been, it makes you feel good to know that someone from Norwood's been asked to contribute to this experience. So I'm very proud of where we've come, and I know that we could not have done it without their help. So I'm very thankful for everything they've done for us. So.
I just wanted to make one last comment. We obviously are located in Norwood, HCDC is, so we're not going anywhere. We're very interested in economic development in the city. So it's our home, and we're very interested in helping with the redevelopment.
Thank you all very, very much. I'm on page 3 of your report, and just recalling that you all began this work back in September of 2018, and that was possible in part with the funding from Duke, but possible also because the administration said yes to this funding opportunity. So along with all your thanks, I want to give a huge thanks to the current administration for welcoming this funded opportunity. I don't know that anyone could have imagined a year ago all of the growth that would have happened. I remember talking to Bob along the way and asking about the uptake. And could you just maybe share, because I don't recall, did you have to turn away any businesses that wanted to utilize the program, or any individuals?
No.
So this was a resource that was available to anybody. The testimonials you hear are from the organizations that stuck with it. They did the work. I remember Bob sharing early on that we don't do the work for you. We kind of point out what's happening. I know I had the privilege of being in one conversation with Bob with a startup. And it was a good conversation. There was some good challenging thought and discourse to make sure folks were pointed in the right direction to have a viable business plan. And so I just want to say thank you. I'm thrilled that this has been the outcome. I know that it didn't have to go this way, where there'd be at least 2, but more organizations that said yes and did all of the work needed to have these testimonials. And I expressly want to say thank you for doing the extra work around existing conditions. This is a phenomenal tool. If you haven't, council members, checked out page 13 and beyond, there's some wonderful maps in there, and it leads into some profiles I'm wondering, since this is, I'm not sure if everyone's seen this before, if you can maybe just walk through what the maps represent?
Sure. So the first map, it basically outlines the focus area for the survey that we did, the GIS. We physically went out in very cold weather, I will tell you, with our handheld devices. Students were offered from Xavier, but we just felt like by the time we explained it to them, that we could just head out and do that. So this is the focus area in blue. In red is the opportunity zone, to just kind of see a little bit of the overlap of the two. Land use map here is the next map. This is top property owners, so we did an analysis of concentrations of ownership of property.
Is this the third one, top owners by parcel?
Correct.
Okay.
This is a physical conditions analysis, so this is our take on the conditions of the properties that we analyzed. Somewhat subjective, but we used the same criteria that Xavier used, and that was kind of where we felt like we wanted to do this ourselves and not send, try to educate students on this. So
Okay.
we felt good about the uniformity.
When you say Xavier, I know here it says the Community Building Institute, so I just wanted to call that
I'm sorry,
out.
yes.
And when you say the same ones they use, is that referring back to the housing study? Or is this a different
Yes.
set of standards? Okay.
They did both. I believe they also did commercial properties, but we
Okay.
did share their criteria, yes.
And that was criteria that had been used years ago in the city?
Correct, but they've also used it elsewhere.
Okay.
Yes, at
Okay.
adjacent municipalities.
Okay.
And yes, sorry about that, it is Community Building Institute.
Okay. Thank you.
Zoning map, we got this from the city, but the focus group wanted that map. Demographic information was pulled, we subscribe to Esri, so this demographic information is basically information that we have available to us as a paid subscriber. This is also Esri, that might be all I have, yep. Community profile and whatnot is all from subscriber information that we receive from Esri. And obviously, you could feel free to reach out to us to have that updated, so.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
you.
if you don't mind,
Nope,
I
go
just
ahead.
have,
This is wonderful.
not necessarily related directly to our conversation, but on the community profile, the page 1, it has here 2018 total population, 19,947. It then has 2018 total daytime population, 21,348, and then it breaks it down 12,165 workers and then 9,183 residents. So is this saying like employees that work in the city in the daytime, is this estimating that it's 12,165? Is that kind of what that's saying?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay. Cool. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments from council members?
Oh, I do have one more. Yep.
Yeah.
So is there a PDF copy that we could potentially get of this that we could put online?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
This is really nice. I love maps and all things maps. This is really, this is great.
These are great
This is going to
tools.
be in the front of my file cabinet, so this is
Good.
perfect. Nice job.
Yeah. Thank you all again for all of your work over the last year, and thanks for bringing in this report.
Absolutely, thank you very much.
Well, thank
It's
you.
been a pleasure.
Great.
So at this time, we've got a couple pieces of legislation to consider, going back almost about the same amount of time. Everyone should have a copy of
Okay. So if you don't need to go, you have to go.
of the ordinance draft amending, the draft ordinance amending ordinance 18-2009. So one of the things we've been discussing is how to make our overall ordinance, which includes a community reinvestment area in the city program, a tax abatement program, how to make it more efficient and how to make it more effective. And one of the suggestions that we discussed a while back had to do with Section 1, which is amending it to include language around how decision-making flows. And so Section 1 and Section 2 are the amended areas, if you will. We've had this, I think, at our last meeting, well, prepared for our meeting last month, but did not get a chance to discuss it. So would like to hear thoughts on adding in the requirement under this subsection to have review.
I'm okay with it. It covers off on everything we've talked about, I think.
Yeah, essentially, we wanted to try and connect the dots. There's a review process that currently does not include reporting those results to this body. And so essentially what we're asking is to amend the current review process of abatements so that this committee gets a copy of those reviews.
Yeah.
There's not a lot out there, but that's not a mechanism that's currently in place. So this would be language that would be added to the overall amendment, or excuse me, this is language that would be amended in the overall ordinance. Any other comments, thoughts on that one?
No, I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well then, as it relates to that amendment to that ordinance, I will ask the law department to prepare that amendment for consideration at our next regular meeting. So moving on to our next agenda item, the resolution requesting regular updates to council on actions previously authorized or approved by council. So another discussion area came up. We were in conversation earlier this year, although it feels like last year. There was an agreement that had been signed but not enacted for a tax abatement program, and it was never reported back to the council that approved the agreement ordinance, nor was it reported to this council, although I was made aware that the agreement was not in effect. And so we talked about how we might get a better handle on updates on what actions have taken place after we've authorized them. We were kind of broad, and appropriately so, because we have not had many administrative reports to this council overall. Some of the feedback I received as this was drafted was we would need to be pretty specific in asking for those updates. So if you look at Section 1 and Section 2 of this draft, it's basically providing that there would be a monthly administrative report on the status of previously authorized actions. And that Section 2 goes on to say that this body would put it in writing what exactly it wanted to report on. I think it's within the scope of this committee to recommend updates on any previously authorized abatement program would be in those reports. And I would suggest if we think that's a good idea, then maybe in our discussion with the whole body, thinking about are there other standing items we'd want to have updates on, or if we like that clause at all. Mr. Thompson, I can tell you got something. Spit it out.
I honestly, I think that we could, like, I think I would like to see everything that we passed, abatement, resolution, ordinance, whatever, a message back saying X was signed by mayor on such and such date, such and such time, X for every single thing that we do, not just, I mean, the abatements of course are important, that's what we had run into on the previous thing, but it's really, we honestly, once we sign something over, once we vote to pass something, I don't think that we ever get any kind of response back notifying us that any or any appropriate action was taken on that decision by council. So I think it could be just a blanket where whatever we pass during the month prior, you know, it's got to have a certain amount of lead time.
Yeah. Other thoughts on that? You want to chime in? No, you have thoughts. Let me be more specific. Any other council members have thoughts at this point? Mr. Monson?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So on this specifically, it's kind of, we've got a new city administration that will be coming in. I don't know exactly what their style will be, but I have to imagine that this, the style will be more transparent, more communicative than our current administration. And so I'm totally fine passing this. I don't think there's anything wrong with this, having this out there. So yeah, I have no objections. I just don't know how necessary it really will be, but it's probably better just to go ahead and pass it now before it becomes an issue in the future.
Thank you for that comment, Mr. Bonzal. I do think there's opportunity definitely for improved communication moving forward. I think this is also important to recognize as of right now, operating under statutory like we do, there's nothing that compels this type of interaction. And so to the extent that the legislative body wants to put in place kind of some, I'd call them expectations around communication, that this would be a mechanism for that. So whether this stays specific to economic development and we suggest to the whole body, hey, how about something that asks for a monthly report as a separate act, I think both could be helpful in just creating a practice around that. Okay. Yeah.
Just a response to that. So there's nothing in this resolution then that it will compel the city administration to do anything
That's
either.
so true.
And so I would say if that's kind of like what we're looking for, and plus, by the way, this thing is probably going to get, after a year, it's going to get lost or somewhere and nobody's ever going to pull it back out again. Whereas, potentially, if maybe there's a place in the codified ordinances, we could add some kind of a thing saying that once council approves it, that the city administration will provide an update in bulk, maybe once a month, of the actions that they took based on a council thing, based on a council action, I guess. Maybe if anybody wants to comment on that might have more expertise in law.
If anybody, like the law director.
Yeah.
So before the law director, who is here, thank you, speaks, I think it's important to acknowledge two things. One, I think we're in general agreement that as a committee, we do want to hear updates on approvals of economic development agreements.
Yes.
That we've authorized. And I think two, there is a different conversation growing around, is a resolution asking for administrative responses enough of a tool to establish that practice, or would an ordinance be an effective tool for establishing that practice? Mr. Moore, do you have any thoughts?
I have a number of thoughts on, I understand the goal here, and I understand, the feeling that, well, we have no idea what's going on. I absolutely understand that. I want to say, as far as, there's a couple of things. My first thought when Ms. Stevenson suggested this was, I was like, okay, was about, let's say, okay, council's authorized to putting out bids for salts. Do you want a monthly report that, okay, we advertise for the bids on this date, and then at the next council meeting, do you want to report, we got these 3 bids, and then, and we accepted this one, and then do you want a report in November that we had the delivery of 2,000 tons, and then a report in January, we got a delivery of 16,000. You know what I mean? It's like everything that counts. That's the first thing. Is like, I know you guys don't want a monthly report of everything the administration does. So, and all the departments do. The other side of this is, I have experience, not at my current employer, which is small and privately owned, but I have previous experience in corporate America, where we were understaffed, but we were still required to file reports on everything we did. So every time you do something, you have to file a report about it. It's incredibly time consuming. It doesn't do anybody any good, and you forget. It's just one more thing to keep track of. So every time we do something, we're now expected, whoever it is that's doing it is now expected to and I have to send a memo to council that I did this. And so there's a balance here, and I don't know how to codify that, whether it's in a resolution or in an ordinance. But I mean, that's the practical one. If you put something, whether it's a resolution that ends up being signed and going into effect, or an ordinance that goes into effect, what's going to happen is something's going to get missed unless suddenly the workload drops or we hire more people that work for the city to handle stuff. Because a lot of times you're just in crisis mode, and the idea of having to send a memo, like for my office, I did this, and now I now have to send a memo updating everybody. And to be honest, there's ones I missed. I probably should have let them know. But the idea of doing that, of adding that on top of everything else, is just, you just want to shoot whoever's doing that. The other side of it is things will get missed, and a year from now or 2 years from now, especially if it's part of the codified ordinances, somebody's going to pull it out and say, I can't believe the lax behavior of the, you know what I mean? It's a tool to beat somebody with. It's something that comes out on your personal development report when you fill that out every, you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing that comes up. And so I think my suggestion would be, when I was on council, we wanted to find out, like a request that the clerk send a letter to the mayor, can you send us an update on this? Or send it to the chief, can you send an update on this? I suspect that the new administration, I don't expect them to have the same kind of health problems, and so they will likely be at a lot more council meetings. It'll be easier to have a back and forth and to work that out as far as what you want information from, what you don't want information from. I think that it might be worthwhile to add, things like, we have a CRA agreement, something like that, the council signs. It would be nice, I can understand, we'd like an update on that, like maybe include that in the term, something, but I mean, I understand that. I think that's more of a, what are the things you want updates on? There are times, like, we've had issues with, we approved the purchase of these radios. And then we're running around, to be honest with you, within the administration, is like, was that contract ever signed? Did anybody get that delivered over? Did anybody get that thing back that we need? We need the insurance on this. Have we gotten that back? And so I don't think you guys want reports on every step of that, or TA sending a report, we bought these computers and these 4 have been installed. And then the next council meeting, I got the rest of the fire department computers installed. It's that kind of thing. It's just finding that level. I'm not sure there's a good way to do that other than just as a practice of working through it back and forth with the administration.
I think for me, it was the specific issue we had in hand was that the mayor had never authorized, or we thought that the mayor had never authorized something that council had sent forward. So the kind of detail I was looking for wasn't nearly as granular as that. It was more like every ordinance, every resolution we pass has to be, well, as you say, we can't force the administration to do anything. We're just giving them the authority to authorize what we've done. Right. My point when I said I would like to know everything was everything was like everything that we passed, it got signed on this date, and that was like the end of. I don't care if once he's signed the salt order, if somebody actually I do care that somebody goes and buys the salt, but more it's just the actions that we take. The next action has been taken. That's the extent of what I was talking about.
And I absolutely understand. And I think I know the agreement you're talking about. And there were reasons not to sign it. There were reasons not to deliver it to them, to execute the agreement. There were definitely some reasons there. But I certainly understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I'll add a couple of thoughts that are surfacing. I think we're having some synergy around it needs to be a finite scope if we're going to move forward with a resolution, not all things. And our purview, specifically being economic development, we were focused on finding out were the agreements we had authorized, our previous councils had authorized, actually being executed. I also think that it's a valid point to be aware there's a need for communication that has to be balanced against workload. And that's real. People are people. And we only have so many working here. I think the question that came up in my mind's eye is to consider, do we as a body need to put more thought, time, energy into expressing the type of back and forth communication? And is that tool a resolution? Or are there other tools, other processes that can help flesh that out? So for instance, as part of the fiscal recovery work that's taking place, it's my understanding that there's opportunity in some work in some departments, but I don't know if this is happening in all, to create handbooks, processes, et cetera. Are you familiar, Mr. Moore, with communication being a piece of any of those? Is your office being consulted on how other departments are doing that?
I don't think there's any major, I don't think there's anything large that has come to my office at this point. I'm not sure. I understand that there are some departments that are kind of working on that, but I don't think we've seen anything come through the law department.
Okay. Do you happen to know, is there an employee handbook being worked on? Is that something that would go through your office?
At some point, that would go through my office. In a perfect world,
Yeah.
we would have the time to do the employee handbook. Yeah, but not that I don't think we've seen anything in particular on that. So.
Okay.
But I mean, if you were going to do a full-blown employee handbook that includes all of the things that would be in a typical employee handbook, it would absolutely go to the law department. To just, if only to say, this is not a contract.
Well, any other thoughts or comments on how we might gain updates?
I just wanted to give you also a different kind of perspective. When I was on council, I just assumed everybody was paying attention to what we did on council floor. So if we had a motion, if we passed something, if we didn't pass something. And I'll tell you, all the department heads get a copy of the agenda and they may look at it, but there's, if I wasn't coming, the meetings that I've missed, I really don't watch them. So there's a lot of things that happen. It's the people that work for the city do not necessarily know everything that council does, even though it kind of seems like it does. And I know that that's true. Other departments kind of assume that everybody else knows. That there are communication issues. It does, sometimes it does kind of go both ways. So, but yes, better communication, whether this is the best tool or whether it's, hey, let's send a letter and say, hey, can you give us an update on this? A lot of times it might be a little quicker. They may not realize that, they don't know. I thought everybody knew. Right. And there's a lot of things you pick up if you just come to City Hall during the day. You tend not to get out in less than 4 hours because you run into people and you find out about, this is going on and that's going on. And so, some of it's kind of by osmosis. And so that's, whether or not this is the best, I just wanted to give you that perspective that when you're on council, you kind of think everybody knows what you've done, and that may not be the case.
Makes sense. I would say then we should probably hold on this as a resolution. I wouldn't put it for our next meeting at least. Because I don't think it's probably pointed enough or detailed enough to get what we want.
Right, and that's why I put in the second section, which is, okay, and council's going to send somebody a letter to let them know what's the thing they want to hear about. So,
Yeah.
Because I wasn't sure where exactly.
Right.
we wanted
So
to go on this.
what I'm wondering is if we need to define out that section too
Yeah.
before we actually get to.
Mr. Monsell, you have a thought?
Yeah, thank you so much, Leslie. So the other, I mean, hearing what Keith Moore, the law director, is saying now, I mean, I wonder if, are we trying to create a resolution to account for the one issue where there was a, you know, and there are a few other examples came too, but I almost wonder if it's even appropriate to even consider the resolution, you know, by the full body, because one, again, we don't know who, I mean, you know, I presume that, like I said, the next mayor will be more communicative than the current one. The second one is that there hasn't been that many issues where we pass something and it's just literally not gotten done. I mean, most of the times when we actually, the council passes something that we've been asked to pass or that we've considered, you know, it's been taken care of relatively. So, you know, to me, I almost just wonder why we need to do this, at least at this exact moment, if there's not issues that we're facing. Because and the second thing would be the only example that I've really heard about that where we haven't been given updates or something hasn't been signed. I mean, none of us except maybe Mr. Braden was even elected. I think Mr. Braden was elected, but Mr. Braden was elected, but none of us were elected back then. So I don't know. Like again, I just don't know where the need really is for this for right now.
So I'm hearing a couple of things. One is the council that approved the CRA that was discussed as not being executed in full was not us, but we were made aware it didn't happen, which is part of what initiated the conversation around how do we hear back from the administration once we've approved something. I think it's appropriate to consider right now we don't have a mechanism in place. And I think it's important to consider what's that worth. I know that there have been many times where I've heard something about an economic development deal in the public that didn't go through this body. And not that we are the keeper of all things, but I think having a process in place where as a committee we can be saying we'd like to have a monthly update on economic development agreements that we've authorized can help with accuracy of information as well as accountability. There are annual review processes, but again, we haven't gotten fully through that, but that's not all coming through us. So yes, there was a very specific incident that opened up this conversation, but I think it opened up an opportunity to align some things, including a clear path for understanding this is what we've agreed to, this is the authorization we are expecting, and this is the execution that goes with that. And I think this resolution, whether it becomes more specific or not, was intended to then say, so what has happened? And I think that is helpful for changing the narrative around what it's like to work with the city. I mean, if this committee and this body can then go forward and say, yeah, like there's a new, you know, unicorn shop on the corner and it's working well to, I don't know, give out sparkles, whatever. Like, it's helpful that we know that and it's not being told to us, in my opinion. So
I
another thought.
agree with what you're saying.
Mr. Braden, did you have any thoughts or questions?
No, I don't, not at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Bronson?
Okay, thank you. So I still don't know that, like, it's really this, like, the body of council who should verify, especially like the CRA agreements, and should make sure that, like, oh my gosh, like that thing was signed. I mean, to me, primarily it's the applicant to make sure that their stuff is in order, but to make sure that that stuff was signed, and if not, to raise awareness that, hey, look, I haven't gotten this back yet. Or I would think that it's the building department or the economic development department, whoever's the economic development officer for the city. I just don't want us to get into the weeds, or us, a future councilor or whoever, to get into the weeds of having to, like, manage these processes. Really, it's our job to approve the resolution or the ordinance that gives approval for the signatures to be made, but it's not our job to sign them. And if they don't get signed, then essentially, like I said, I think it's really more the applicant that should be responsible to make sure that happens. But that's, or to at least know that they don't have their agreement in place. I mean,
You know, that might actually be a better approach, is like a request that council be notified if an action that was authorized by council was not carried out, was intentionally not done. That might be a better I mean, that actually is something you do want to know. Well, we approved that, what the heck, you know? And it actually occurred to me that, like, just a perfect example of the, council does things and people don't know is I've gotten emails where I've been copied on emails that eventually got to me where council passes 3 readings, suspends rules, pass the readings to change the appropriations, so, because we got a pace for something right away. And Wednesday afternoon, the person who needs to know that so they can order whatever it is, sends an email to Joe or to the mayor or to Tim and says, hey, did council pass that? Because council's not like council's clerk sent them a letter saying, sent them a memo saying, oh yeah, we passed that. You know, they'll check with the auditor, you know, that kind of thing. It's that, those kinds of things can fall through the cracks, even for the people that really want to know. They're like, hey, can we go ahead and order this now? Because they don't know, because they weren't watching the council meeting. So, yeah, sometimes I think it might be, it's like if the issue is we authorized it, we assume it's safe to assume it's happening. So maybe let us know if it doesn't. I mean, that might be a bit different approach.
That would be different.
It would be. You know, I mean, it's
Do you
it's
think
not
that
like,
would cover off on, because I agree with your concerns. Do you think that covers, I think that kind of
I don't
covers
know.
off on.
it's just a dot.
Assuming best intent, I do think that would work. I'm not going to assume best intent. I realize that this is a good conversation, and in terms of our timeline tonight and our discussion of this, I think I would like to suggest the section 2 make a request specific to notices around authorization around the CRA specifically, because that is, we approve that agreement that's embedded in an ordinance. So I think it would be appropriate for this committee to know that is executed. I think that all the other concerns around where the onus lies are important. So I think it would be good to have more discussion around that. I did hear the point, is it relevant at this point in time? I think it would be interesting to hear that discussion with all of council. And so I would suggest making section 2 more specific and reporting this out for more discussion around the timeliness.
And I just want to toss this out. I did eventually learn that it's best before you pass an ordinance that you confer with the person that's actually going to have to do the work that's in the ordinance. And so that's really who should be in the discussion.
Thank you for that insight. Mr. Bonsall, you have something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to also suggest that, I mean, we could just make it a standard operating procedure that in the CRA ordinance that we're forwarded back a copy of a signed copy once it's actually signed. And just put that in the body of the CRA ordinances that we pass in the future. Just if that's really specifically what we want to see done. But again, I mean, I've said my piece, but I mean, there's nothing in here that's like, other than maybe could be looked at as too specific, but I mean, it's not like a super controversial resolution. I just had concerns about how effective it would be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we
That's
don't need,
important.
so we don't need to like waste all of our time on it, but I will say that it, just something that, my thoughts were just something that I was concerned about, but either way, I mean, whatever you all decide to do, I'm fine with.
I understand the concerns that we have and the comment about best intent. I understand that. I'm going to make the comment that we are all going to be pleasantly surprised that we're not going to have these issues any longer. I've got all the confidence in our new administration that we aren't going to have these issues. If there's something that we are going to want to know, I think we're going to find that out very timely. And you're going to find out that we're not going to have these issues any longer, I believe. That's going to be my understanding of this administration.
Thank you, Mr. Braden.
But on the other hand, trust through verification, I understand exactly where we're at with this discussion. Thanks.
I think those thank you, Mr. Braden. I appreciate your comment. Mr. Moore, what you shared about conferring with the party that we need to take action, I think is very wise. Thank you for offering that. Mr. Bonsall, what you offered in terms of adding to the amendment of the CRA ordinance 18/2009, I guess 15 rather, with the amended timeline, a line about having a copy of the contract delivered back is also prudent and would eliminate the need for a separate document that calls for that type of action.
I would actually recommend, because when's the last time, well, I have, I'm not sure anybody else has read this, the actual ordinance creating the CRA
A
program.
couple times.
Since, yeah, right, but I mean, you know, a lot of years, nobody looked at it. But I would recommend actually adding it as a section to each ordinance that authorizes a CRA agreement. And I have a note on my draft of the one, so to add that as a section that,
Excellent.
so, because then it'll be fresh in everybody's memory. You pass an ordinance that creates a program, and 2 years from now, nobody's reading it.
So would that need to be, so Mr. Moore, you're recommending that each agreement have a section that says a signed copy of that be shared back?
For the CRAs anyway, yeah.
Does that change the operating ordinance?
No.
So would it be more appropriate to have just a statement requesting that or a resolution requesting that? Because we didn't design that template, so.
No, I mean, it's just the ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a community reinvestment area agreement with, and then section 1 is the mayor is hereby authorized to enter the agreement. Section 2, it's declared to be an emergency, and then, well, instead of, that makes section 2, section 3, and then section 2 will be,
Yeah,
and when the agreement is executed, the mayor will forward a copy to council. I mean,
right.
that's all it is.
I understand where you're
Yeah.
saying about the mechanism. I just wanted to have clarity because I don't know who made the actual agreement template. Is that a legal change or is that just an operating change?
It's kind of like we have some ordinances that get passed that says, and the clerk is hereby directed to forward a copy of this to wherever it is, or, you know, that becomes a part of the ordinance and it's right there and everybody sees it, and so it's obvious and a reminder every time one of those passes, so.
So there's no motion that needs to be made to change that in the agreements, the way they're written?
Well, the council hasn't had this ordinance yet, so when this comes to council,
You're
gonna
talking
add
about
this.
the operating agreement?
I'm talking about the ordinance, this is a draft of the one for Ventura Commons. It's a draft of the
Yes.
ordinance authorizing that agreement, so my thing is
Right.
that we'll add that to the template, and the next time we draft one, we'll pull up the most recent ordinance, version of the ordinance that we did, and change the names and the dates, which is kind of what we do. We don't start them all over from
And you're
scratch.
talking about the language in the ordinance, not the
Correct.
language in the agreement?
Correct.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to make sure I was clear on.
Okay.
Then the language in the ordinance is the purview of your department.
No, yeah, well, the agreement to a certain extent, but in the ordinance actually would direct the mayor to do something, as opposed to the agreement is an agreement between the city and the property owner, and, you know.
Okay.
and tossing council in there's not a good way to do it.
I like that suggestion. Other thoughts?
I like it.
Do you have a thought there, Mr. Braden?
No, ma'am, thank you. Oh, I have plenty of thoughts. I don't have a comment, thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that distinction. All right. I think that's enough discussion on that item. Next, we have the negotiating committee. So one of the things we discussed a couple of different times was having an opportunity to gain more input from stakeholders other than just this committee on how an agreement is shaped. So we've talked about having these, what's bracketed here as appointing authorities, be some stakeholders. We mentioned the school district, maybe like the health department, one organization that shared some concern at our was it our last regular meeting? Maybe our last regular. Keep Norwood Cool had expressed concern about some agreements, and so I shared with them, hey, we're going to be talking about this. They might be another organization, and others throughout the city that are not just organizations, but even people. So I think today would be the day to think through who actually needs to go in here if we want to pursue this route and exactly how this group would function. There's a blank in section 3, and so that's what would need to be further defined. Mr. Bonsoff.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, I almost wonder if we should go to almost like start talking about like the actual set members, the firm members. So the part 2 of this, and then maybe come back to the appointing authority if we see like gaps of where we are. I mean, of course, I feel like their city council should have at least one appointment onto this thing.
When you say part 2, you mean under the terms?
Yep,
That
yep.
part, okay.
So, in my opinion, if you look at the way, I mean, there's a great document online on the Ohio Development site.
Yeah, you shared that with us early on.
Yes, and it has like various just suggested people to be on them. Right now, there's just a lot of surprise. So, like, basically, when the 1 or 2 times that we've had this since I've been elected, all of a sudden one day the mayor shows up and is like, "This is our CRA, and we need to pass it." And essentially we, consider it and pass it or don't pass it or what have you. There doesn't seem to be a lot of like, I think it would be good to have at least one of us a council member on there so that they can be hearing some of the discussions, understand a little bit about what's going on, and then be able to provide some feedback to their fellow members when we are considering a CRA, that, hey, look, those concerns were talked about, addressed, what have you. So, anyways, long story short, I think that one of the appointing authorities should be the legislative authority or the city council.
I would, if I could, I would suggest with what you want the negotiating committee to do,
To start there?
to start there. Because you may want the tree board to have input, but do you want the tree board to be saying, no, we can't accept that kind of a term for that agreement? I mean, that's the thing. So are you actually talking about, these are the people that are going to negotiate with the words that are in the document, the proposed agreement, before it comes to the Economic Development Committee, before it goes to council? I mean, is that what you're talking about? And I understand that that may be, that's something that's possible, and if that's what you want to do, then that's what you need to figure out. Or do you just want somebody to review it and offer comments to this committee, for example, before it goes to council?
So,
If it's a CRA, for other agreements, you can have it. Do you want them to negotiate TIFs? Do you want them to negotiate PUD? Do you want them to negotiate? I mean, that's the question. Is like, what is it do you actually want that body, those people, to be responsible for negotiating on behalf of the city? And the question is, how are they going to communicate to the policymakers in the city, or how are the policymakers in the city going to negotiate to them what works and what doesn't work? And that's really the question: is do you really want? These are the people that negotiate all our economic development agreements. You need to talk to them. Or do you want an advisory group, or do you want, I'm just not. That's what you need to figure out as far as before you start talking about who goes on it. Because there's lots of people you want to have input from, but that you wouldn't necessarily want to be the ones negotiating on your behalf. Because they may have very, very different interests than you have.
So, to me, when I think of negotiating committee, I'm thinking of a committee that helps to balance and to objectively look at what's being proposed and what would be essentially what would be an appropriate amount of incentive to offer in the CRA, and by a committee that would essentially, and I think there would be representative from the school district. There would be a representative, in my opinion, from like I said, city council, from the administration, of course, any economic development office. Potentially, the mayor could have an appointment of an outside, just a resident that's really interested and knows kind of what's going on, or a business leader or what have you, that could help provide some direction to the city. But in my opinion, that it'd be the two objectives here are, one, to ensure that things move quickly. So like the committee would be able to move a lot faster than just trying to come here, have this council committee meet once a month and take 2, 3, 4 months to really hash all this out. And then the other important part of this is to include the public constituencies, like the city council or the school board or whatever, include them earlier into the process, instead of just what kind of happens now is like, well, the city kind of gets done with their thing, and then they go talk to the school board to see if the school board will do their thing, and essentially be one committee that can look at the overall community, not what's necessarily completely best for the city, not what's best for the school district, not what's best for the specific business, but really like balancing all three and trying to see like, look, what is the most appropriate for our community? Because I think in the past what we've had the city that we basically just look at what's best for the city, like, and that's it, and we completely ignore the other people that we're affecting with some of the decisions that we're making by exempting businesses on some of these taxes. So that's my thoughts on it.
It just occurred to me, here's the way that the developer wants as much as they can get and to do the least amount they have to, and they want it done as fast as we can possibly do it. That's what they all want. That's the deal.
Sure.
And so, and I understand the idea of bringing in, it just occurred to me now that what you're going to have is you're going to have negotiating among the negotiation committee on what to do with this application. And then that's going to be presented to the business owner. And so, I'm just taught that's what it's,
they don't have to be there for that part of it, though. I mean, like, that's...
Right, but I mean, it's like you're going to have, because you're talking about the city negotiates on behalf of what's in the best interest of the city, but I mean, that's, if you bring in the other stakeholders, and I get that, that's not, I'm not saying that's not a valuable process, or that's not a valuable exercise. I'm wondering if, I'm just trying to figure how that works. It's like,
So
the school says, well, no, we're tired of giving out tax abatements. This isn't going to bring anything to us. And this group says, well, no, yes, we like the idea, but you're going to have to add, you're going to have to spend $800,000 on landscaping. And this group wants to do this. And the city's like, no, we just want to bring the jobs in. And that group is going to have to negotiate amongst themselves as far as what's going to be an acceptable project. And I'm just picturing that as that's part, it just popped into my head. It's like, oh my gosh, I can just see that.
Mr. Brady?
We have, the way I see it, we have this power, I say power, but we have this, the administrative will come to us and say, well, these are who I want on the committee, and we get to vote on it. So if we don't like it, we can just vote no. So that's my first comment. And secondly, as far as the abatements and things like that, we are competing against other cities. So if we just say, well, we don't, let's say, I don't know, let's just use somebody throw out of thin air. They come to us and say, well, we want 10% for the next 5 years. And if Reading is going to give them 12% for the next 5 years, they'll go to Reading. So administrative have to have some sort of bargaining tool to draw that here. So I guess my point is we have that right now. If they bring us appointees or they want to put somebody on this committee, we have the authority to vote that down. So I guess, am I correct by saying that?
Once the committee is, well, it depends, because what we're talking about now is defining the committee, and part of that is defining who appoints the people to the committee. And if it's the mayor appoints all of them, does council have an advice and consent role? Does council appoint a couple people? Does the school board appoint somebody? Does the Port Authority appoint somebody? I mean, if they want to have somebody on I mean, that's the question. That's part of what we're at now, is defining the scope of because it doesn't actually exist now. I mean, in theory, the mayor can, we're going to hire, mainly Burke to, we're going to hire Dinsmore to negotiate all of these for us. And they could do that. But that's really kind of the question. We don't have enough to keep anybody busy, so it's not really worthwhile. But that's kind of the question, is defining, do we want to have some external or partially external or some committee that's responsible for negotiating these and has to approve any agreements before then they come to this committee or they go to council or the planning commission or whatever it is.
So, great discussion, great points. Some of the things that are opportunities for us might feel like a big lift or feel a little confusing, and I think that's okay. We're endeavoring to do things different for the sake of doing them better. And so one of the tools we glanced at a while ago was a rubric that said, hey, if you are doing housing or if you are doing commercial development, what's the value add to the community? Being able to utilize a tool, an economic development tool, I think is what the negotiating committee does when hearing a proposal. We've not vetted that tool just yet, but I think there are tons of resources, and in fact I know there are, that could be utilized. I would say as a path for having a group of people who hold the interests of the city. We don't yet have a community benefit agreement, which is often a tool communities define ahead of considering economic development opportunities. That tool would say things like, hey, if you're bringing in a project that's going to net $1 million, maybe we're going to only agree for 5 years. But if you're bringing in a project that's going to net $10 million, maybe our community has already agreed that $10 million investment is worth a 15-year abatement at this amount. That type of decision-making, that type of negotiating, I think, is what is recommended in the tool we read from the state. And I think that is the type of safeguard that could help the city be ready to leverage development opportunities without having to wonder every time an agreement is made, do these numbers really make sense? And is this project perceived by our city, all the stakeholders who we feel like would want to voice a thought, is it perceived as valuable beyond the money exchange for the length of time? And I think that's something that this is expressly saying. So for those who are listening, there's a document online. It's called the Ohio Community Reinvestment Area Program. And if you look at it, what we have been looking at, which has been kind of the framework that we've started talking about and how we got to this draft, it recommends the local jurisdiction assemble its own negotiation committee to determine if a CRA exemption is warranted for the proposed project, and if so, how much exemption is appropriate. So based on what we've read in here, and it says, common members of a negotiating committee include CRA housing officers, school district officials, expressly suggesting the school district treasurer, elected officials, county economic development professionals, county auditors, local business owners, and interested citizens that understand taxation and economic development. All of our public meetings are open to the public, but the thought with this committee would be there's a group of residents who have a voice, who have a point of view that can help raise up, this is what our community values. This goes on to suggest that the negotiating committee should establish a list of both quantitative, such as the amount of investment, the number of jobs created, the amount of infrastructure costs. Those are items that are in our current agreement template, so that's not anything new, but the suggestion is that there would be a group beyond this body who decide are those favorable or not. Qualitative items might include, is there a catalytic impact for the project? What are the types of jobs created? How would this project adhere to any established community development plans? So if the city were to pursue a plan, does this proposal fit? And if so, how well? All of that would be a part of the decision-making process when deciding on what is going to be the agreement. So I think to go back to the suggestion of, if that is the what, that we're in agreement, since that is how the state suggests potentially leveraging this program, then who are the parties we think should be a part of that?
Are you saying bringing together that group to define the rubric? Here's the way we're going to measure projects? Because I think that's a valuable exercise.
Yes, I think that group would be super helpful in doing just that. This has been a long conversation, and I think maybe some of the pieces of it have been disjointed. I don't think we should convene a group and just say, tell us what you think. I think it needs to be a group of informed folks who have tools to work with. And I think that group, to Mr. Bonsal's point, should definitely include a member of this committee, and that this committee should review what's negotiated. I don't think the negotiating committee is autonomous from this group. In terms of our current CRA ordinance says Economic Development Committee approves the actual agreement. So the negotiating committee would not approve the agreement. They would negotiate it and would bring it as a recommendation to this body, is how I've conceived of the idea, so that the committee would still be signing off knowing this is what is recommended by the stakeholders who are holding, first and foremost, the benefit of the community in mind.
The ordinance when it was drafted, essentially this committee, I forget what it was called then, but this committee was that was essentially going to be, we're negotiating. So if it comes in, you're going to come down and sit down and talk to us, and we're going to go back and forth with you. That was kind of what it was. It was also passed at a time when any incentive, because we looked at, we looked at having scoring mechanisms in the ordinance. Does it do historic preservation? Does it do, environmental issues? Does it, like, all of those things? And it just got to the point where it's so complicated and the economy is not good. Let's just whatever, let's offer it up to any project that might be worthwhile. So, re-examining that and coming up with a different rubric, given the current economic situation, is an excellent idea, and I think is worth pursuing. There's no question about that. I just want to give you the background. The current form of the ordinance was, that's why it got here. It's like, it was too complicated to deal with the rest of it. The people that were gonna actually sit down and negotiate were on this committee, and it was, we just took out all of that, all of the kind of measuring things you can have in an ordinance like this, or scaling numbers based on different, scoring, simply because we wanted to encourage whatever economic development we could in 2009 and 10 and 11 as well. So,
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Ms. Bonsall?
Yeah, just a quick kind of question, I guess, possibly for the law director, for what have you. So is the vision for this committee, to me, the vision of this committee would be that it's not a committee that necessarily holds their meetings in public, because they're going to be hearing from economic development. Is that kind of the same thing that you would say, Mr. Moore? Like, would that be kind of your vision of this negotiating committee, that it would be, because right now, when the mayor meets with the developer, he's not required to meet with the developer with TV, on, right? So they can have the conversation. And to me, that's kind of what this committee kind of helps to do, is to help provide him with the mayor, safety service director, with more tools, essentially, and more information as we all kind of go about. So I guess just a question for you, would this committee be able to meet without having to meet in public, to allow at least more open discussion for that?
for the most part, you have to have a public meeting. It's got to be open to the public. I will say that for all of the 2000s, the beginning of the 20-teens, I guess you call them, the committee met during the day, a couple times a month, if not every month, without cameras.
So I'm gonna
and so we negotiated, this committee negotiated the Linden Point TIF agreements. We went over Rookwood TIF agreements. And that included all of Cornerstone, TIF, like all the PUD over. We sat down with developers and did them. The meetings were public, but the public didn't show up at 1 o'clock on Wednesday afternoons. But the staff did from the building department, and the developers came, and the cameras were not on. So we had almost, they were relatively private conversations. But unless you're talking about some really seriously confidential information, it's hard to do anything like that.
So even
at a council committee meeting, it's like an executive session.
But that's what I was saying. Like, it's not a council committee, though.
Right,
like,
but a negotiating committee, yes, could do that.
That's what. Yeah, I'm not talking about the council. This council committee,
Yes.
definitely not. We will always meet in public. It's the negotiating committee is what I'm talking about.
Right.
So they don't have to necessarily.
So if you got 4 members in this committee, you
Well,
can have
right,
2 people from the committee at the negotiation sessions in private, yes.
Okay, so that helps me to understand. Okay, so that's helpful. Yeah, so then exactly everything that Leslie said, then, in my opinion, this committee would even come up with that rubric, because it's really going to be the mayor, safety service director, they're going to be the ones, in my opinion, that are going to be setting kind of the heartbeat of this. Like, it's going to be a lot of their objectives and priorities for the city that, just like today, we don't have this at all. It essentially is the mayor and the safety service director, so they'll be providing guidance. I would hope that they could come up with, I would hope that it would not necessarily have to be our committee have to come up with all of this rubric that they will follow. I want them to come up with their rubric and maybe report back to us. But
So there is a tool, I'm actually going to send it back out. There is an equitable development rubric that is being presented to developers who want to develop in Cincinnati. It was developed by Peasley Neighborhood Center, and it was shared out last year at the Neighborhood Summit. And I know that there is a big push going on right now for individual organizations, for municipalities to sign on to it. It is pretty robust already. There's a lot of work that's gone into creating it, but it would be a tool that could be a launching pad, whether that's for the administration, the negotiation committee, or even developers to organize some of their thoughts when they want to bring a proposal to our city. We tested out a couple other questions around housing when the lateral project shared with us. I don't think you were able to make that meeting, Mr. Bonsall, but it was helpful to hear their thoughts on what would be the additional impact of their project on our city. I'll send this back out so we can continue looking at it, but I think I'm hearing it's worthwhile to have a body that is informed with a tool that includes Economic Development Committee members think about what the proposal is before it is signed into agreement.
Can I make one more comment?
Yes.
Thank you. So I want to be careful because all the comments tonight are thoughtful and and needed. I'm concerned about putting are we over-regulating? In other words, do we put undue stress on the process versus other cities do not have? And if we make it a little, if we have too many stipulations and other cities do not, we are essentially competing for. So if we make it if we overly regulate, if we do this and have too many, I feel like it might be, maybe I'm wrong, correct me. We don't want to regulate the process.
But that's the policy question to make. The approach has been, you want to spend $75,000 or more, then okay. And if it's not a completely ridiculous thing, a final use that we don't want, then okay, fine. You can, we'll help you out. That's kind of been the approach.
Right.
But,
I don't
you know,
want to, like I said, I don't want to be
there's,
combative here because everybody's.
Yeah. But there's a policy decision to make. It's like,
Trying
well,
to
do
make
we
the
want to
best
do that?
interest here.
Has the city been too generous? Does the city want to target these in a different way and make them less available to anybody that wants to spend that kind of money on a project? So, I mean, there are somewhere, I don't think you're going to do the building across the street or down the block. I don't think anybody's going to do anything without some kind of help because it's just not happened. But there are other projects that probably would have gone forward even without it, but, we're happy to help. Since most of the, to be honest, from the city's perspective, since the city collects about 12% of whatever property tax, the city would collect about 12% of whatever property tax is collected, it's not a big hit to us. But it does have impacts on the other places where those tax dollars would have gone without the abatement.
Yeah, and I think what Mr. Braden's comment, I think that's really what, if there's, to me, my vision of this is that the safety service director will send out an email. Look, we've got some people that want to talk to us about, we've initially talked to them and they want to kind of present to us about what they want to do and how much of a CRA they want. So here, we're going to have a committee meeting next Wednesday at 2 o'clock. If people show up, if some people don't show up, that's fine, but the committee just moves forward anyways. And I don't think it has to be something that really overly stalls it. I think it's just more keeping those people informed and in letting them, and potentially not doing the fire hose approach where we give that 49% or that 50% CRA to anybody that comes in. I mean, the hospital thing that's over in Compass Health on Section Avenue, that I'm pretty certain that would have been built no matter whether we approved that CRA or not. But
Maybe not there.
Potentially
at that
not.
time, maybe not there.
Who knows? But either way, essentially, though, I think that there could be opportunities, though, to not do the fire hose approach. I mean, we're in the center of the county. We've got great location, great assets. Hopefully soon we'll have some great roads now that we've got some road money that we've set aside. So essentially, there's a lot of benefits to being here. And so the thing that I hear from people constantly is, do we always have to give CRA agreements like the city has done in the past, or do we, at this point with the economy better, do we try to be more deliberative? And I think we have. I mean, we haven't even seen very many agreements. We haven't seen hardly anything come forward in the last couple of years. There's a lot of projects that have happened organically in the city that could have qualified, but they either never came forward or the mayor didn't have any interest in helping them. So, and I think that's what kind of this committee kind of helps to determine that. So,
I don't think, as a practical matter, if somebody files a commercial CRA application, I think it comes to my office, like kind of automatically. If they're, the dollar amounts are here and all that kind of stuff. I think they automatically come to our office to start working on an agreement. I don't think there's anybody that's like saying, no, that's not going forward.
Yeah, I just wonder
if
though.
They meet the requirements. So we just haven't had many applications.
Yeah, that makes sense.
for the commercial ones. Lots of residential, and maybe it's time to revisit that.
So, yeah, that makes sense. Like, Leslie, do you think you have enough on the why they're here, like what they'll be doing on Section 3?
I do. So I think we should use the language that's in the development,
Procedures, yeah.
that's in the procedures for enacting the CRA exemption language, and I can send that to the law department with the other suggestions for who goes in here. I think I'd also like to suggest we wrap up discussion by doing two other things. One, I'm going to make sure I send this tool out to you all, ask you to take a look at it, and let me know if you want that specific tool included in here as a way to operate when doing the what that's already in the enforcement. And then the second thought would be just to confirm if there are other bodies that we'd want to copy and let them know, hey, we'd like for you to be a part of this. I've reached out to some that I know would be on this list, but haven't been able to reach all of them. Yes.
Okay, so just two things to think about. You know, I don't think that the city council should be approving members on this thing that the mayor appoints or any other
Where are you getting the mayor appointment
Well,
from?
I'm just saying if there is, I'm sure if there is a mayoral appointment on there, if there's anything, I'm using an example. So if the mayor, let's just say the mayor has an appointment onto this thing, or the safety service director has an appointment, right? To me, I don't know how much council should be approving those appointments. However, let's just say the school board has an appointment, or the Port Authority. I mean, I'm just using examples that have been brought up today. Like multiple people have been brought up today. I've never been presented a list of what you're really wanting to see on there. So that's why these are kind of hypotheticals. But let's just say that.
Wait, let me ask a point of clarity. You're saying the appointments to the negotiating committee?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I thought you were talking about something else.
Okay. So I don't know if we should be approving appointments that the mayor or the safety service director make, but I do think, though, that there could be an argument made for city council to approve appointments that potentially the school board makes, or the Port Authority if we included them. Again, I don't know who we're including, but because, potentially let's just say that there's issues or what have you with maybe a specific member that an appointing authority approves, then is there any, I guess, right of us to say, you know what, no, we don't really want that specific person, send us another example, send us somebody else, so.
I would question the need to give somebody the ability to appoint somebody if we're going to override anyone's appointment.
I mean, these are outside entities, so they're not part of the city, then why are we giving
But the whole point is we're trying to identify the people that we want to make appointments. If you're not going to trust the appointments that they're going to make, then why give them the ability to appoint? Why not just say that we want council to appoint those?
And I get
And we'll do it in their best behalf, because that's what canceling someone's appointment does.
I mean, I think there's arguments either way on it.
I'm just
because
throwing
I
out
still,
the devil's advocate there. It's like otherwise they're not making appointments. We're telling them to guess until we get the one that we want.
I don't know if, I mean, I cannot imagine very many situations where council wouldn't approve the appointment. I mean,
Then let's just say that, well, then you either have the confidence in the groups that we're asking to make appointments that they will make good judgments because they have a vested interest in what we're doing or what this committee is doing, or you don't.
I would have to say this, if you're gonna say we want a representative from, example, the school board, I'm gonna assume the school board is sending someone that represents the school board's opinion on things. And while the city may not like their opinion, if the idea is to incorporate the views of the school board, you gotta let the school board decide who is gonna represent them and present their views. But council, it's your committee, so you can say, if you're creating a committee, you can define it any way you want, pretty much. There's a few restrictions, but.
So with that in mind, I hear the points of view on appointing and approving. I had never conceptualized that we would approve appointees I thought we were focused mostly on the entities that needed to have a voice, and they would, I think we moved towards, or their designee, specifically because the feedback came that if the health department were a member of the negotiation committee and the day that that the meeting needs to happen, they can't be there, do we move to a new date? Or do we just move on with negotiating without their point of view? So the idea of a designee was to say, we know we want the perspective of that entity, and if someone other than the lead official needs to come, then that would be acceptable. So again, this is, I'm going to speak in the affirmative, designed to create a way to bring in multiple points of view. Obviously, well, I won't say obviously, in my opinion, I did think they would be bringing the view of their home organization, if you will, and therefore creating a really robust dialogue around what is best for the city. So, if you feel like there's a specific point of view that's not already spelled out in the tool we're often referencing, let me know. I'd like to write that up, get this back out with the language of what the committee would be doing for your review. Not reporting out on this yet, because I think we might need to look at that one more time. Is that agreeable?
That's fine.
Okay. I think we got one more item. Before we move to that item, though, please let me know before Sunday evening if you have additional specific entities that aren't on that Ohio document.
So the question is, are you expecting that this could come up for a vote to the full council on Tuesday, at least for a first
Nope.
reading?
I want to have this back out to you next week for your consideration.
I won't have drafted by then. Not gonna happen.
Get to work.
Yeah, no, not by, yeah, I'm nervous about your ability to handle things right now. There's a lot going on in your department, okay? So I think on the agenda is next the ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter enter into a community reinvestment area agreement with Ventura Commons LLC and declaring an emergency. So we had a draft agreement right before our last committee meeting, and we heard from Pete Ventura Jr. Concepts about the project. I think everybody received at that time a copy of their application for the CRA program, commercial application, and a copy of the plan for a minor PUD. Anybody need this? You guys want to have this copy down there?
I've got one
Can
here.
you pass that one down? You got that over there?
I didn't bring it.
Okay. So I just want to reference, this is that project. And there was, I had an opportunity to meet with the building commissioner to talk through this agreement. We had not corresponded before our committee meeting, 'cause we'd just gotten this. And so what you have in front of you is the version with track changes. The first page essentially just provides the information on what they're aiming to do, which is renovate the space for the purpose of bringing in office and banquet venues. The second page essentially spells out the amount of space, how much they think the investment in the project will be. I'm on page 2, section 1, B. The time period originally was thought to be November 1 of 2019 through December 1 of 2021. That is a space where obviously amendment still needs to happen. Getting over to page 3, this is a space where there was an encouragement to this body just to reinforce, and not that it needs to explicitly go in here, but if you see the comment under section 2C, any type of work that actually happens on the sidewalk is not part of this agreement. That's not anything that the city takes ownership for. That would be a part of what actually takes place with any type of work happening there. And that was just called to my attention when I was able to discuss this. If you look over on page 4, all these highlights just mean these are blank spaces where either we have not been provided information or the type of project doesn't have a one-to-one correlation for this information. So overall, if you look at the top of 4, section C, the thought is that there would be 70 full-time permanent jobs created from leasing office space. So not developing for a specific business, but businesses would then come in to that space. That was spelled out, the timetable for that's in section D. So this is looking at 0 new jobs in year 1. Year 1 would just be construction is what's proposed. 25 new full-time permanent jobs and no permanent part-time jobs in year 2. You see the number there for year 3. There's a number for full-time in year 4. And then, I don't know why it's out of order, but nothing in terms of part-time for year 3. Any questions or comments so far?
Other than that's a tough one to do because it's spec office, so got no idea. It's spec office space, so there's no idea, we anticipate this. So they're not going to list part-time jobs that are going to be created any more than like Linden Point's going to say. And we expect that, the people that come, 4 of them will be part-time and 300 will be, there's just no way to do that.
So a couple of the comments I had in here on page 5, Mr. Moore, this was just new to me. I don't know if your office has insight into the language change on section E, or if you have an answer to my question there on.
I think that's just a typo. The 2 should stay in.
Okay, so that stays. And, well, I'm sorry. You can ignore my question. That comment was actually for the auditor on page 5. So I think to Mr. Moore's suggestion earlier about modifying the ordinance language that holds an agreement, page 7, section 9 says miscellaneous. Section A, it says the developer and the city acknowledge that this agreement must be approved by the formal action of council of the city as a condition of the agreement to take effect. So a line like that could then be followed by a copy of it, the signed agreement, or do you think that would just be?
I would just put it in the cover ordinance.
Okay, excellent. So that would go in the cover. Okay, so a couple of things. Sorry, let me go back. I skipped a page here. Yes, I apologize. So on page 5, section 5, this is not the most up-to-date copy. So this section A, section 5, letter A, this is where the time period of the actual exemption needs to go in. This is a space where I think the support of a negotiation committee would make a lot of sense. What was discussed when I had a chance to talk with the building commissioner was just common practice, not necessarily best practice in terms of how we arrive at that number. But there definitely needs to be added to this some type of, I think we traditionally use the language of clawback. So what happens if the job development and the dollar investment numbers aren't met? Usually there's like a plus or minus 10% that goes into the contract. I think in this section, do you have a copy where section 5 is filled in?
I filled it in as a 12-year, 49%, just because the agreements we have with like clawbacks are, they generally, the enterprise zone agreements and those don't exist anymore because there's no personal property tax. And then for the, earnings tax kind of refund agreements, those have clawbacks. If you miss this number, we can claw back so many years. For these agreements, since they're really, it's odd. It's required that you have the language in here about job creation, but it's not required to give anybody a tax exemption that they create any jobs. I think that language is in there, is required under state law. Like, they've got the model language, it's got to be in there and includes all the jobs things. And I think it's so the state can determine, the theory, I think it initially was the state can determine, are we actually creating jobs with this? But it doesn't, I don't consider that to be part of the operative language of the agreements. If they don't get the job numbers, I don't think that, but they meet all the other requirements, I wouldn't say that automatically makes the contract invalid or that they haven't met their obligations, because their obligations under the contracts, under the way these contracts are written, the obligations, the developer's obligation is to build, is to spend this much money on a project in this time period. Because the amount of jobs that go in there really has nothing to do with the value of the, well, it does for commercial real estate that you're renting out, but it's not, the auditor doesn't raise the dollar amount initially because of how many people you rent it out to. They raise it initially because of the amount you spent on the construction, which is reflected in the building permits you get. So, but you could put language in there that says, if you don't have this, if it's not 70 full-time jobs by 2025, or if it's not this many jobs, whatever, you could put language like that in there to claw it back, if you wanted to.
So this council has seen agreements that have those languages in there, those sets of language, one with callbacks and with job requirements, with that plus or minus. This template does not have that in there.
I don't think we have any CRAs with clawbacks for job creation.
Is it just then the intention? Because I'm pretty certain when we looked at Paycor, there was an agreement that had a specific number.
That's an agreement that gives them a rebate on the earnings and profits taxes. Because the city collects 2% of that. If they hit those numbers that are, I don't know how many millions of dollars it is in payroll, the city will write a check to Paycor at the end of the year. 1%, half of that money goes back to them. We have the same kind of agreement with CDK. Those have clawbacks because for us, it's not you built the building, it's you brought the, the tax incentive is based on the amount of jobs. If you don't have the jobs, we're not going to give you a tax rebate on that kind of an agreement. But the CRAs don't have those. And I would just say the question here, the policy question here is, is the fact that he's building spec office space, so you don't know. Is the fact that that building's going to be rehabbed and available, is council going to say, no, you don't get the tax rebate if you can't then lease it out?
Yeah,
and that's kind of the question.
For me, this isn't I could see potentially putting the job creation in there if this was a business wanting to move in here that knew that they were bringing X number of jobs. But the whole point of this is to rehab this building, to open it up. I think, honestly, I look at that building and fitting 70 full-time jobs in there is a pretty high and lofty number, because you would have to have, you're talking cubicles on every one of those floors to be able to fit that kind of number. So to me, to require them to have that kind of number when they're just going to be happy if they lease out that office space, and they're not going to have any say of whether or not that lawyer who leaves out the office space has 3 people filling that entire floor or 15 people filling that entire floor. That's just not what they're going to be concerned with. So to me, I wouldn't put job creation or the number of jobs created as a stipulation on whether it works or not.
And I'll say you never know what's going to happen, because we built Cornerstone and we got twice the jobs in those that we expected. We built Linden Point, and the only big tenant that went in was Brown Mackie College, which are not doctors or financial advisors. That's a different income base. So and that's one of the things you have to judge that based on the project. What kind of project are we talking about? So. But I think that it's, if you're going to put in, like, you got to have this done by this time, you got to have it fitted out and ready to lease by this time. I think that's worthwhile putting in.
Yeah, I agree.
So, that's interesting. Discussion, I think it's important to,
And I'd say that those same considerations will go on if and when Terex comes over here for the office building they want to build on Harris. So, because that'll be spec office as well.
yeah. So I just want to circle back to our previous conversation. So I think that having the timeline and the development dollar amount included are important to see this move forward in a way we think is beneficial. If we don't think that job creation is important for spec space, then I think it's a little more cumbersome in my mind's eye to express what's the value to the community, because we're generating a space that has an unknown element to it, which that's business. I get it. Just want to be mindful that
I would say along those lines for this project, I would say having that office space renovated and willing to move in is a valuable project for the community. But if you want to add a target, have that the banquet facility is open and available by a certain time. Because that's the big community
that is
benefit
the
there.
thing that they are planning to build out. Any thoughts on a timeline around that other than the 2025 that was in here? I mean, I think essentially they were aiming for a year out for that. Let me go back. I think I've got the,
I think that's what he said. It was a year to build out.
initially it was December 21, I think is what was in there. November 1 to December 21. Sorry, I'm going
I
back
don't
to
have
the
any comments on
initial.
the timeline. I just, as a child, that was Fidelity. And
Oh, yeah.
I used to go in there. Well, it was a bank, and I just know that building has been abandoned for years. No one's done anything. I'm just excited somebody's now putting the efforts into the revitalization of that building, and I'm excited for that. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I mean, I guess I agree kind of with Mr. Moore on this and a little bit what Mr. Radin said. I mean, this is a building that has been abandoned for years. And so whether they have 10 jobs in there when they're done or they have 100 jobs in there when they're done, right now if they do nothing, the property taxes are not going, I mean, the value of the building's not going up. So if they don't make any improvements. So to me, there's no, by approving the CRA, and especially since it's only a 49% one, it's not 100% CRA, any increase in value we're still going to see some benefit from. But we also see a benefit because our historic part of our city, the very small part that's left on that, the pike, if you will, that building will now be restored and kind of saved and not potentially demolished in the future for whatever. And so, yeah, to me, I'm not super. I mean, whatever you all decide on the restrictions, I mean, that's fine. I would, considering that the developer bought the building and that they want to make money from the building, I would think that they would want to get the banquet hall open as soon as possible. And the CRA also it's not even valid if they don't actually spend the money because they have to show that they spent that money. So I'm not super concerned about the clawback provisions for the specific one, only just because, again, they want to make money, and it's a historic building that's already there, so if it's empty, it's not doing anything anyway, so. But however we want to do it, it's fine with me.
So we've got some interesting things happening. I see the specific development, I think we are all in agreement. Yeah, it's going to add value. I think being able to look at agreements on a case-by-case basis is important to being a good partner with specific opportunities as they arise. I also think we are responsible for creating a standard. And so I'm grateful for all the conversation and thoughtfulness around what will allow this to move forward in a way that is a benefit and doesn't hinder the opportunity, as been said, for the developer to look at who and what are the best options for full-time employment there, or even part-time if that's what shakes out. I think where I'd like to get input or hear, at least, are we in agreement? We do want to emphatically say we want the banquet center open by a specific time.
I think as long as it's a reasonable time, yeah. I don't like the idea of saying we want it open in 4 months and.
No, I agree.
So,
It ought to
whatever
be
a reasonable
reasonable.
time is for
Well,
that development, I'm fine with
if
saying
I'm-
that that's what we want.
If I'm paying for something, if I'm the developer and I'm paying to have this developed and I want to have this a banquet hall, I'm going to do it the quickest I can and then get that income revenue generated as quickly as possible. So, I mean, as far as the timeline goes, I'm sure they're on their own timeline and they're going to try to get it done as quick as they can to generate their income. So, I'm not so much concerned about that. I'm pretty sure if they're spending this type of money, they're on the timeline.
I think it's okay still to say we want it done by X number of times so that it doesn't just lag for whatever reason, but I want to be fair about it.
Yeah, what they had drafted was December 1st of 2021. I think it's appropriate to acknowledge we do expect there to be an end date. I don't
Yeah.
think that's becoming too prescriptive or too narrow.
No, I think that's fine.
Sounds good to me.
So at this point, I think the only other amendment that needs to happen with this is we need to be able to solidify the time period needs to go in here, as well as language that is connecting the completion of the banquet center and the revenue generation to the agreement around the abatement.
Can you repeat the part about can you explain more about the revenue generation? What did you mean by that?
So page 2, section 1B has a number in here. And although we've said job creation should not be a condition for the agreement, this still does include this
Okay.
dollar amount plus or minus 10% would be the condition. That is the constructed improvement that the
Gotcha.
developer is saying that they will
Okay.
produce.
Yep. So-
Okay.
Yep.
So that's what they put in. I just want to make it clear.
Yeah, I thought.
We're not crafting an agreement that makes job creation a condition of the abatement.
Yeah, I thought I'd heard you say the revenue generation. That's why I was
Oh,
confused. But
sorry, investment, the total investment.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, I probably did use that other word.
No, you're fine. I did are we wanting to have this on the next council, like this council meeting this Tuesday if we can, or?
I will defer to the law department to let us know. Could this be prepared for Tuesday?
Yeah, I got like 3 changes to make,
Excellent.
and that's, because I have a draft that's like cleaned up a lot of the empty
Okay.
spaces, so. Yeah, and I can have that, and my thought was to add a specific clause that says the banquet facility shall be open and fully operational by December of 2021. Just basically, that's part of the developer's obligation, it's gonna be required, so, just to make that clear. I mean, it already says, like, the whole project's supposed to be done by then, but just to spell that out, or I don't know if there's another date, but that's the one I'd really hold them to. Yeah. 2 years it's doable, but, you never know once he gets in there and starts. There may be things that come up, but then you can always come back and say, hey, can we get an extension? We'll be happy to give you an extension. We understand that you've had problems, instead of just ignoring us for 3 years and then, hey, where's my abatement?
Right.
Okay. So, Mr. Moore, you've got note of those 3 changes. I think I sent an email to your office with another recommendation around, I'm looking, I don't see it here, maybe I dropped it in and didn't push send, but I will also make sure I write to you. I had some notes around what that plus or minus 10% then yields. I don't think we've ever gotten that specific.
For the plus or minus 10% on,
Not the plus or minus, if the agreement, so one of the things that we've not encountered, but I don't know that this fully speaks to, if this dollar amount is not met, does that just mean the contract is void? Or might we include in here a scale, so to speak? So say for instance, 45% of the total investment is actually achieved. Would we have an agreement that is parallel to 45%, or would it just go away? That is a point of view we've not yet defined as a body or as administration, and if we had that, it'd make it a whole lot easier to determine what happens next.
Well, I mean, you could, the thing is, it's already scaled because it's just a percentage of the abatement, but if they spent, you know, it's $2,320,000 plus or minus 10%, that number comes from the developer. If they're not comfortable with that, then I don't have a lot of sympathy for them. If they come in at $1.2 million instead, that's something they need to come back and we need to amend the agreement if council wants to, you know, or do something to move forward if that's what they want to do. But if they commit to that money, we're saying, listen, you're going to invest this much. If you invest this much, we're going to give you an abatement. If you're not, but you got to, if you're not going to tell us the right number up front, that's, I don't think that is our problem, because they're the ones that have budgeted it out, I would hope, right?
So,
And how often does construction come in under budget, really?
so does there need to be any language added that says if it's not within that 10 or plus or minus, the contract is void?
No, that's part of the developer shall renovate a facility of approximately 23,000 square feet. Oh, no, that's the wrong clause, and it's the next one. The project will involve a total investment by the developer of approximately $2,320,000 plus or minus 10%. Summary is attached as Exhibit B. So I consider that a requirement. I mean, that's, you know, project will be open on or about, will begin on or about, I'm going to change it to January 2020, and everything will be completed on or about December 1st, 2021. I'll probably push that back a month too, because we pushed it back a month. Just to be kind. And I'm always willing to add 6 months to any of these, just on principle, because I don't want, you know what I mean? I don't want everything to go kablooey because they were 30 days late. So, and I doubt we'd have a problem with it if they were. We just waive that. So, but
When you say we just waive that, is that the prerogative of the department?
it's a practical matter. It's a prerogative of the building commissioner sending the certification that they're done to the county auditor.
So there is some flexibility on the administrative side once the contract is approved.
As with any contractor is, yes.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? So this will be ready for Tuesday.
Today's Thursday?
That's correct.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot
May not
going
have
on.
it sent, it may not go out in your packets at 10 o'clock tomorrow, but
I
we
think
can have it.
if you can send a PDF copy of it.
I will send something to Pam that listed on the agenda, and we'll get, I don't think I'm gonna have it done. I'm since it's 8:45 now.
Oh, no, I know it won't
I
be there.
doubt I'm gonna have it done by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. That's just,
For
it's
sure.
quite possible.
Yeah, no, but if
Right.
you could just, whenever you get it done, send it to us. I'll, the full council digitally or give it to Pam or whatever, and I think that would be fine.
Because, you know, there will be somebody who says, I can't believe they didn't give us more notice on this. I'm just saying. It may not be a council member. Somebody's going to say it.
Yeah, so I guess then can we at least get the ordinances listed? So you're going to at least list the ordinances on the agenda, though, at the very least.
I will tell Pam to list it.
Perfect.
Now, what Pam does, I don't know.
To me, that's fine.
So we will consider the revised ordinance with that agreement as an attachment on Tuesday. Thank you all. We had a lot to discuss. Much of it we've been holding for a little while, so I appreciate all of the feedback. Thank you, Mr. Moore, for staying, giving your insight as well with that. Unless there's any, nope, we're all looking done. We're done. Thank you.